try to dig in, Murphy?
Too late for that now. We'll never be able to stay here with 30 men. Put them on back seating time with A Company.
Audie Murphy was one of America's greatest war heroes.
We stood off 500 Plains Indians for 9 days.
John Wayne was one of Hollywood's biggest stars. For years, their names have been connected by a story that goes far beyond movies, fame, and military service. Murphy had reasons to be frustrated with Hollywood, and some claims about his feelings toward Wayne have continued for decades. But the real story is far more complicated than the simple feud you've probably heard. What happened between these two men? And why did Murphy reportedly have such strong feelings about Wayne? Join us as we uncover the story behind Audie Murphy and John Wayne, separate fact from rumor, and reveal the real reason this controversial story has lasted for so long. Two men, two wars. Audie Murphy and John Wayne became two of the most recognizable names connected to American war stories, but their experiences could not have been more different. One had actually fought in Europe. The other became famous for playing soldiers and tough American heroes on screen. That difference would become important later, especially when Murphy's feelings toward Wayne became a subject of discussion. Audie Murphy grew up in poverty in Texas. His father left the family, leaving Murphy and his many siblings in difficult circumstances. His mother was the person who held the family together, but she died in 1941 when Murphy was only 16. With little money and few options, Murphy learned to work and hunt from a young age. When America entered World War II, he was determined to serve. Getting into the military was not easy. Murphy was young and extremely small. He was reportedly around 5 feet 5 inches and weighed only about 110 pounds when he tried to enlist. The Marines and paratroopers rejected him because of his size and age. Eventually, the Army accepted him in 1942. He was still a teenager. Murphy eventually went overseas and fought across North Africa, Italy, and France. He quickly gained a reputation as an aggressive and fearless soldier. He was wounded several times, but repeatedly returned to combat. By the end of the war, he had become the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. His Medal of Honor was the highest recognition for his extraordinary courage under fire. But it was only one of the many decorations he received. Murphy earned numerous American military awards, as well as several foreign decorations. His record was not based on a movie role or a public image. It came from actual combat. One of the most important moments came on January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France. Murphy's unit was facing a powerful German counterattack. Several American soldiers had already been killed or wounded, and the position was in serious danger of being overrun. Murphy ordered the surviving men to withdraw to safer ground. He then stayed behind. A damaged American tank destroyer was nearby and had caught fire. Murphy climbed onto it and used its mounted machine gun against the advancing German troops. Despite being exposed and under heavy fire, he continued shooting. He was wounded in the leg, but refused to stop. Murphy later received the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. The Army credited him with helping stop the German attack and protecting his unit from being overwhelmed. This was the man who eventually entered Hollywood. Not a soldier pretending to understand combat, but a young veteran who had already experienced some of the worst fighting of World War II. John Wayne's path was completely different. Born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907, Wayne worked around movie studios before becoming a major actor. His breakthrough came with Stagecoach in 1939, directed by John Ford. The film turned him into a major Western star and helped establish the tough, confident screen personality that audiences would associate with him for decades. When America entered World War II, Wayne was 34 years old. He was married and had children, and he was already under contract with Republic Pictures. His age, family responsibilities, draft deferments, and professional commitments all played a role in keeping him out of uniform. Wayne did make efforts to enter military service. He attempted to enlist and explored other ways of serving, but he never became a wartime soldier. His studio also had reasons to keep one of its biggest stars working. That does not make the simple claim that Wayne was a coward accurate. His wartime situation was complicated, and reducing it to one accusation ignores important facts. But the contrast remained. Murphy had fought the war. Wayne became one of America's most famous men for playing the kind of soldier audiences wanted to see. And that raises the question at the heart of this story. Was Murphy angry at John Wayne himself, or at what Wayne came to represent? And the answer gets much more complicated once Murphy enters Hollywood. Hollywood wanted the hero. When Audie Murphy returned home in 1945, he was not simply another young veteran looking for work. He was already a national hero. At just 20 years old, he had received the Medal of Honor and a long list of other military decorations. His combat record had made headlines, and his photograph appeared on the cover of Life magazine in July 1945. Almost overnight, millions of Americans knew his face. Hollywood noticed, too. The movie industry understood that Murphy had something most actors could never claim. His military record was real. He had actually fought in Europe, been wounded, and performed acts of extraordinary courage. His name alone could attract an audience. James Cagney was among the people who recognized Murphy's potential as an actor and helped him get closer to Hollywood. But once Murphy arrived, the industry faced a problem. The man in front of them did not look or behave like the traditional movie hero. Murphy was short and thin. He looked much younger than his age. He was also quiet and uncomfortable with attention. He had spent years around violence and death, and the experience had clearly affected him. He was not the loud, confident personality audiences had come to expect from Western stars. That difference mattered. Hollywood already knew what a popular male star was supposed to look like. John Wayne was one of the clearest examples. He was tall, broad, confident, and had a deep voice that made his characters sound powerful. His screen presence fit perfectly into the westerns and war films that studios were producing. Murphy did not fit that mold, but Hollywood was not going to ignore a Medal of Honor winner. The studio system saw a way to use his fame without necessarily giving audiences the difficult story behind it. Universal eventually signed Murphy and began building a career for him in westerns and action movies. He rode horses, carried guns, fought villains, and played men who solved problems with quick decisions and quicker shooting. These films gave Murphy steady work, but they rarely allowed him to explore what he had actually experienced during the war. That distinction is important. The studios could use his military reputation in advertising. They could tell audiences that the man on the screen had been a genuine war hero. But the movies themselves often reduced him to another Western star. There were horses, there were gunfights, there were revenge stories, there were clear heroes and villains. The complicated parts of Murphy's life were usually left outside the theater. Meanwhile, John Wayne was operating at a completely different level. Wayne had already established himself as a major star. He worked with important directors, appeared in bigger productions, and had a carefully developed screen identity. His name could help sell a movie before audiences even knew what the story was about. Murphy was still trying to prove that he could act. That difference could not have been easy for him to ignore. He had returned from Europe with experiences that had changed him permanently. Hollywood, however, needed him to become useful to the entertainment business. His military record made him valuable, but his personal experiences were much harder to package. This created a difficult contradiction. Murphy had something Hollywood desperately wanted: authenticity. But real authenticity could also make audiences uncomfortable. People were happy to hear that Murphy had won the Medal of Honor. They could celebrate his courage, buy magazines with his photograph, and watch him play a heroic cowboy. What was harder to confront was everything that came with the real experience of war. There was fear. There were nightmares. There was survivor's guilt. There was sleeplessness. There were memories of men who had not come home. There was the psychological cost of killing another human being. Those subjects did not fit easily into the simple stories Hollywood was selling. Murphy's later life would show just how serious those struggles could become. He dealt with insomnia, nightmares, financial problems, and what was then commonly called combat fatigue. He also became increasingly willing to speak about the difficulties veterans faced after returning home. That makes the alleged resentment toward John Wayne more complicated. There is a popular version of the story in which Murphy simply hated Wayne because Wayne had become a bigger star, despite never fighting in World War II. But that explanation is too easy, and it risks turning a complicated relationship between real life and Hollywood into a simple, personal feud. The deeper issue may have been what Wayne represented. Wayne had become one of the most successful performers of the heroic American soldier. Murphy had actually been one. The difference was that audiences could enjoy Wayne's version without having to confront the painful parts of war. Murphy's real experience was much harder to make comfortable. That does not prove that Murphy personally hated Wayne for those reasons. Any claim about his private feelings needs solid evidence. But it does explain why the contrast between the two men became so powerful. Hollywood wanted Audie Murphy, the hero. The difficult question was whether it wanted Audie Murphy, the human being. And that question becomes even more important when Murphy finally got a chance to make the kind of war movie he had been waiting for. The Red Badge. For Audie Murphy, the Red Badge of Courage was supposed to be different from almost everything else he had done in Hollywood. He was not being asked to play another fearless cowboy who always knew what to do. He was being asked to play a frightened young soldier who did not know whether he had the courage to fight. That difference was exactly what director John Huston found interesting about him. Huston was already an important filmmaker when he began working on the 1951 adaptation of Stephen Crane's novel. He had also served in the U.S. Army during World War II and had made wartime documentaries. His own experience with military life gave him little interest in presenting combat as simple entertainment. Crane's story gave him the opportunity to show something more complicated. Murphy played Henry Fleming, a young Union soldier who goes into battle frightened and uncertain. During his first major fight, Henry runs away. He becomes ashamed of what he has done and worries about what his fellow soldiers will think of him. Later, he returns to battle and finds the courage to fight. That was a very different kind of character from the heroes Murphy had often played in westerns. Henry was not fearless. He was confused. He was embarrassed by his own fear. He wanted to be brave, but he did not know whether he actually was. That made Murphy an interesting choice because Murphy understood something about fear that most actors could only study. That does not mean Murphy was simply replaying his own wartime memories. Henry Fleming was a fictional Civil War soldier, and Murphy was an experienced World War II veteran. Their stories were different, but Murphy's own experiences could give him an understanding of how a person might physically react to danger. Huston reportedly saw exactly that potential. He pushed for Murphy to play the lead, even though MGM executives were interested in more established stars. Murphy's performance depended heavily on small details. His expressions, nervous movements, silence, and uncertainty were often more important than dramatic speeches. Instead of constantly telling the audience what Henry was feeling, the film allowed his face and behavior to communicate it. That was part of what made Huston's approach unusual. He wanted the audience to experience battle from the ordinary soldier's point of view. There was confusion. There was fear. There was chaos. There was uncertainty about what was happening and what a person was supposed to do. For Murphy, this was much closer to the emotional truth of combat than the standard heroic stories he had been making. The production itself initially appeared promising. Houston became deeply invested in the project, and after filming was completed, a special screening impressed many people who saw the early version. Murphy himself reportedly felt he had given an unusually strong performance. Then the problems began. MGM executives had serious concerns about the movie's commercial prospects. Early public previews produced a poor reaction. Some audience members did not understand the film's quiet treatment of fear, while others reportedly laughed during scenes that Houston considered serious. The studio responded by cutting the film heavily. Houston's original version was roughly 2 hours long. The released version was only about 69 minutes. Narration was added, scenes were removed, and parts of the story were restructured. Houston believed his original version was far stronger, while the studio was focused on producing something audiences would understand and accept. The cuts changed the movie's character. Important moments involving fear, uncertainty, and the emotional consequences of battle were reduced or removed. The released film still followed Henry Fleming's basic journey, but much of the slower psychological development that Houston had wanted was gone. Murphy and Houston reportedly tried to acquire the film so it could be restored, but they were unsuccessful. Much of the removed footage was later believed to have been lost. For Murphy, this had to be frustrating for another reason. He had finally been given a major role that did not require him to pretend that soldiers were fearless. The story allowed him to show that courage could exist alongside fear. Yet the studio's final version was much shorter and more conventional than Houston's original vision. This is where the movie becomes important to the larger story about Murphy and John Wayne. There is no solid evidence that MGM's treatment of the Red Badge of Courage directly caused Murphy to hate Wayne. That claim would go beyond what the available evidence establishes. But the contrast between the two careers is difficult to ignore. Murphy was a genuine combat veteran who had struggled to find serious roles that allowed him to explore the emotional reality of war. Wayne, meanwhile, remained one of Hollywood's biggest stars and continued appearing in major productions where military and Western heroes were presented in much more traditional ways. The irony is striking. The man who had actually experienced combat finally received an opportunity to make a serious film about fear in battle, and the studio substantially changed it. Murphy had wanted to show audiences something more honest about soldiers. Hollywood wanted something easier to sell, and Murphy's next chapter would show just how painful that difference could become. The movie that made Murphy rich. By the middle of the 1950s, Hollywood had finally found a way to turn Audie Murphy's real military history into a major movie. The result was To Hell and Back, released in 1955 and based on Murphy's autobiography of the same name. What made the film unusual was not simply the story. Murphy played himself. For most actors, playing a fictional soldier means learning lines, studying military movements, and trying to understand what a character might feel in combat. Murphy did not have to imagine those experiences. He had already lived through them. The film recreated some of the major events of his wartime service, including the fighting that eventually earned him the Medal of Honor. Murphy was therefore being asked to stand in front of cameras and recreate experiences that had nearly killed him years earlier. That created a difficult situation. On one level, To Hell and Back was a major opportunity. It allowed audiences to see the real Audie Murphy and gave him the chance to tell his own story. On another level, it meant repeatedly returning to memories that he had spent years trying to live with. The movie became a major commercial success. It was one of Universal's biggest hits and became the studio's highest-grossing film at the time. Murphy's name was now attached to a successful Hollywood production based directly on his military career. But financial success did not mean that Murphy suddenly became comfortable with his past. He had spent years trying to build a life outside the army. Now Hollywood was asking him to recreate the most painful years of that life for entertainment. That was one of the strange contradictions surrounding Murphy's career. Hollywood knew exactly how to sell Audie Murphy, war hero. It was much less interested in understanding Audie Murphy, human being. The distinction mattered. His military record could be printed on posters and used to promote a movie. His Medal of Honor could be mentioned in publicity. His combat stories could attract audiences. But the problems that followed him home were much harder to sell. After the war, Murphy struggled with insomnia and recurring nightmares. He later spoke openly about what was then commonly described as battle fatigue. Today, many of the symptoms he described would be recognized as part of post-traumatic stress disorder. He had difficulty sleeping and struggled with memories from combat. At different points, he relied on medication to help him deal with those problems. Eventually, he made efforts to stop taking the drugs, including a difficult period when he reportedly locked himself away and tried to overcome his dependence without professional help. These problems existed alongside another set of difficulties: money. Despite his fame, Murphy did not manage his finances particularly well. He gambled, invested in businesses, bought racehorses, and became involved in ventures that did not always work out. Some investments failed, while legal and financial disputes added to his problems. His Hollywood success did not protect him from these mistakes. Eventually, his financial problems became severe enough that he filed for bankruptcy. This is another reason Murphy's story is more complicated than the image of the decorated war hero suggests. America had celebrated him as a young soldier, but becoming famous did not automatically give him the tools to deal with life after combat. And Murphy was increasingly willing to talk about that problem. At a time when many veterans were expected to return home, remain quiet, and move on, Murphy spoke publicly about the psychological difficulties faced by former soldiers. He discussed combat-related emotional problems and criticized the lack of adequate support for veterans. That was significant because the language surrounding mental health was very different at the time. There was no widespread public understanding of PTSD as we know it today. Veterans dealing with nightmares, anxiety, depression, or other psychological problems could easily be misunderstood. Many were simply expected to be strong and get on with their lives. Murphy knew that was not always possible. He had experienced those problems himself, and his willingness to discuss them gave him an unusual position. He was not speaking as a doctor or government official. He was speaking as one of the most decorated soldiers in American history. That created a contradiction that Hollywood struggled to deal with. The public wanted the heroic version of Audie Murphy. They wanted the young soldier who had climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and fought the enemy. They wanted the Medal of Honor winner. They wanted the movie star. Murphy kept reminding people that the war did not end emotionally when the soldiers came home. There were men who could not sleep, men who struggled to return to normal life, men who carried memories they could not explain, men who needed help but did not know where to find it. Murphy's public comments about veterans therefore became more than a personal issue. They challenged the simple version of the returning soldier that popular entertainment often presented. This is where the story begins, moving toward 1968. By then, America was involved in another major war, and the country was deeply divided over what that war meant. John Wayne and Audie Murphy would once again occupy very different positions in the national conversation. One man would be using Hollywood to present his view of America's newest war, while the other had spent years talking about what war could do to the people who actually fought it. And that difference was about to become impossible to ignore. The final years. By the late 1960s, Audie Murphy's life had become increasingly difficult, but he did not simply walk away from everything. He continued working in film and television, even though the major opportunities of his earlier career were becoming less common. He also continued speaking about veterans and the problems they faced after returning from war. At the same time, Murphy's financial problems remained serious. His gambling, investments, and business decisions had contributed to much of his trouble. So it would be unfair to blame Hollywood for everything that went wrong. He made mistakes of his own. What is important is that his fame did not protect him from those mistakes or from the personal struggles he had carried since World War II. Murphy was also trying to rebuild his life. He continued looking for business opportunities and acting work while remaining involved in causes affecting veterans. He had become increasingly open about the psychological problems that could follow combat, at a time when many people still did not understand them. Then, in 1971, everything ended suddenly. On May 28th, Murphy boarded a private plane in Georgia. The aircraft was flying toward Virginia in poor weather conditions. The pilot had limited experience with the aircraft, and visibility became a serious problem. The plane eventually crashed into Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia. Everyone aboard was killed. Murphy was only 45 years old. The circumstances of his death were especially tragic because of everything he had already survived. He had fought through some of the most dangerous battles of World War II, survived multiple wounds, and returned home to build a completely different life. Yet years later, he died in a small aircraft accident while traveling for a business meeting. His death brought an end to the life of a man who had become famous for surviving war, but had spent much of his later life dealing with what that war had left behind. Murphy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. His funeral was not an insignificant ceremony. It was a major military funeral, attended by government officials, military personnel, veterans, and members of the public. His grave is located in Section 46, not far from the main areas of Arlington visited by tourists. Over the years, it has become one of the cemetery's better-known graves, and visitors continue to pay their respects there. That matters because the claim that America simply forgot Audie Murphy after his death is too extreme. He did receive significant recognition. His military record remained part of the country's history, and his grave became a place where people could remember him. John Wayne's final years followed a very different path. Wayne had remained one of America's biggest movie stars long after Murphy's career had slowed. He continued making major films even after being diagnosed with lung cancer. In 1964, doctors removed his left lung, but he continued working for years afterward. Wayne eventually died from stomach cancer on June 11, 1979, at the age of 72. The public response was enormous. Wayne had spent decades becoming one of the most recognizable figures in American entertainment, and his death received widespread attention. The following year, Congress awarded him a posthumous Congressional Gold Medal. The medal recognized Wayne's contributions to the country and his place in American culture. His name was also attached to major public landmarks, most famously the airport in Orange County, California, which became John Wayne Airport. This is where the comparison between the two men needs some care. It would be inaccurate to say Murphy received nothing while Wayne received everything. Murphy received one of America's highest military honors while he was still alive. He received the Medal of Honor, numerous other decorations, and a prestigious burial at Arlington. Wayne's recognition was different. Murphy was primarily honored for what he had actually done as a soldier. Wayne became honored as a cultural figure who represented a particular idea of American courage, toughness, patriotism, and masculinity. Those are two very different kinds of recognition. And that brings us back to the question that has followed this entire story. Did Audie Murphy truly hate John Wayne? Or was his frustration really directed at what Wayne represented? There is not enough reliable evidence to state with certainty that Murphy carried a personal hatred of Wayne throughout his life. The stronger and more defensible argument is that Murphy had serious reasons to question the way Hollywood and America presented war and treated veterans. Perhaps the two men were never true enemies at all. Perhaps they were simply two men shaped by the same country, one who actually fought its wars, and another who became famous for portraying the heroes that country wanted to believe in. And the story gets even more complicated when you look at what happened to their reputations after they were gone. The truth may be more complicated than the rumors suggest. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. And let us know in the comments what you think really happened between these two men.